Hi guys! So obviously I talk about dolls quite a lot here. If this is your first time here, this is just my channel where I, as an adult collector, commentate about the fashion doll world. But what I've yet to discuss is one of the staple toys from my childhood, that being the macro-sized queen herself, Polly Pocket. Now, Polly Pocket has been around since the late 80s, and like many toys that are that old, she's gone through a number of significant changes in her lifetime. Since I played with Polly Pockets a ton as a kid, I watched a few of these changes happen in real time without really understanding why it was happening or how to feel about it. So now, as an adult with slightly more context in life, I wanted to make this video to really deep dive into the significant eras of Polly's life, including the ones I missed out on and her evolution as a brand. I just find this sort of thing really fascinating, and I hope you do too, so let's get into it. Polly Pocket's origins date back to 1983. Although I personally knew her as a miniature fashion doll with rubbery clothes, the first Pollys followed a much more unique concept. As the story goes, a father living in England named Chris Wiggs fashioned an actual makeup compact into a tiny dollhouse for his daughter Kate. He would pitch the idea to Swindon-based company Bluebird Toys, who bought the concept and put the first Polly Pockets on shelves in 1989. The concept of the first Polly Pockets was simple but effective. Small, compact-shaped dollhouses that could, well, fit inside of your pocket. The sets also included the eponymous Polly in the form of tiny dolls, less than an inch tall, who could move around in and interact with her little world. Polly herself was far less detailed than other dolls at the time, obviously due to being so small, but she could always be identified by her trademark curly blonde bob. She had articulation only at the waist, and a very simple but friendly face, and a circular base to help her stand in her playsets. Much like Barbie, Polly didn't really have a consistent storyline or character. Aside from her appearance, almost everything about her was left up to the imagination. But also like Barbie, she seemed to be unfathomably wealthy and a woman of many different talents. In 1989 alone, we get to visit Polly's townhouse, her flat, her country cottage, and her beach house. So yeah, she's clearly got coin. In the first year, the compacts all mostly came in a few basic shapes: circle, heart, clamshell, or square. There is also a recurring cast of characters we see introduced from the start. Some that were sold in individual sets without Polly to represent international locations, such as Heidi's Winter Chalet or Tammy's Palm Tree Island, but others seem to be friends of Polly's, or at least residents in her pocket-sized town, as evidenced by their cleverly similar naming scheme. There's Midge, Pixie, Tiny Tina, Little Lulu, and a male character called Wee Willie, among others. Also released in the first year of Polly's life were actual makeup compacts and these adorable little rings that also functioned as even smaller playsets. I really get the impression that Bluebird knew from the start how well loved Polly would be. This era of Polly is very much before my time, but I can easily acknowledge it as her most iconic and significant. These early years are what most people associate with Polly, and for good reason. It's where she found the most success, and also where she was most recognizable as a unique toy brand with a pretty amazing concept. Not only that, but the toys were amazingly well executed too. Despite their size, the worlds inside the compacts were extremely detailed, imaginative, and included small interactive pieces as well. There's also just something immensely satisfying at the perfect use of such a small amount of space. It's never claustrophobic or chaotic. There's so many things, but they're all placed and set exactly where they should be. It's no wonder that the brand was an immediate hit and attracted the attention of Mattel, who entered a partnership with Bluebird to distribute Polly in America. Following this, we would get more varied compact shapes such as a flower or a hexagon, and even child-sized playsets made with practical use in mind, such as a vanity and a writing case. We would also see the brand's first major departure from the compact-style toys in 1991 with Polly's Dream World, also packaged as Playtime Mansion. 1992 would see the introduction of fantasy concepts to Polly's world. Before now, Polly sets were always somewhat domestic and based in reality, if a very small one, but now she's dressed as a fairy or a princess or a mermaid. Polly's success would also prompt Bluebird to create a sister brand, or a brother brand rather, in the form of Mighty Max, who followed the same formula but was aimed specifically at young boys. 1993 is what I think most people see as Polly's golden age, and for a good reason. The focus shifted from compacts to actual doll houses, scaled to Polly's size. These opened in a similar clamshell type fashion to reveal incredibly detailed little areas with multiple levels, interactive parts, occasional hidden rooms, and plenty of play potential. The compacts were still there and continued to grow in quality as well, with many of them being made in the shape of animals or other things. The playsets would only continue to grow to become even more impressive. I can only imagine what it must have been like to own several of these. It must have been like having your own little city to play with. Despite the amazing quality of the toys, however, sales actually began to decline, and the Polly Pocket brand hit a roadblock in 1997. Mattel, who was disappointed in Polly's performance, refused to continue to distribute her unless Bluebird redesigned the toys. They agreed, somewhat reluctantly I imagine, ushering in what I would call Generation 2 of Polly Pocket. It's during this period that the Polly dolls adopt the appearance that she's most associated with today, including her iconic blonde ponytail. They also attempted to bring Polly into the modern era of the late 90s, characterizing her as more adventurous and making the compacts into the shapes of gadgets like a cell phone or a CD player. Her old friends are dropped in favor of new ones, namely future main characters Lila and Leah, as well as Mia. We also see what I think is the first iteration of Polly's family, but they're all bizarrely unnamed. Also, in 1998, Mattel fully acquires Bluebird Toys. For all purposes, this seems like a pretty amicable agreement on the part of both companies. Mattel actually saved Bluebird from a number of hostile takeover attempts by other companies and outbid them so that Bluebird could be bought at a much fairer price, and employees who weren't transferred to Mattel could be given proper severance packages. I won't pretend to know anything about business takeovers though, but on the surface it at least seems like things could have gone far worse for Bluebird. So this period of Polly Pocket serves as more of a transition period, if anything. Despite some pretty great sets, such as the ambitious Dream Builder series, these just weren't as popular as the previous generation, and even today just aren't considered the highly sought after collector's items the original Bluebird compacts are. By 2002, Mattel ceased production of the smaller scale of Polly Pockets entirely. This is because, after Mattel acquired Bluebird, they began their bid of turning Polly into a far more traditional fashion doll with the Fashion Polly line. Rather than an inch tall, the dolls were now 3 3/4 inches tall, more realistically proportioned, and featured removable rubbery clothing in the form of many children's favorite chew toys. The cast of main characters, in addition to Polly, included Leah, Lila, Shawnee, Kirsty, Anna, and Chrissy, and not gonna lie, these girls are very difficult to tell apart. There were also male characters named Todd and Rick. These were produced alongside Generation 2 until its discontinuation, but for clarity's sake, I'll refer to them as Generation 3. These are the Pollys I grew up with, and the ones I remember most fondly, though I can acknowledge the issues with this generation as well. In all honesty, the rubber clothes were the only unique thing that differentiated Polly from just being a tiny Barbie. I really do think some of the dolls and the fashions are quite amazing, but they're just such a far cry from the unique toy concept that made Polly into the icon she was. Still, I can appreciate them for what they are. The playsets in particular may not be what they once were, but they were still very well designed and held a ton of play potential. I can remember one specifically, the Mermaid Stars playset, as one of my all-time favorite toys from my childhood. The compacts have the appeal of being very timeless, for sure, but I think the Fashion Polly playsets are awesome by virtue of being perfect encapsulations of the impractically funky early 2000s aesthetic. In 2004, Mattel introduced the Quick Click line, and I very much remember hating these on-site rather than stretchy, rubbery clothes, these were hard plastic clothes that clicked together via tiny magnets. One of the reasons I really disliked these was because the quick click clothes couldn't fit regular polys and vice versa. The quick click dolls also had extremely limited posability due to their hard plastic clothes. They were just so inferior in every way, and also apparently kind of dangerous. In 2006, the quick click products were recalled due to children swallowing the magnets. So just all around a bad idea. Thankfully, the rubber clothes outlasted the magnetic ones, so I don't really count this venture as a separate generation. Overall, this was a mildly successful time for Polly. She was a very recognizable brand despite her dramatic shift in business model and became a fairly beloved choking hazard in family homes everywhere. 2004 also saw the release of Polly's first animated movie, Polly Pocket Lunar Eclipse. 2 more would be released, Too Cool at the Pocket Plaza in 2005 and Polly World in 2006. The movies characterized Polly as an exorbitantly wealthy young girl who's friendly, helpful, down-to-earth, and adventurous. Mattel also launched the Polly Pocket website around this time, which is another extreme source of nostalgia for me. A long-lost relic of Flash, it featured games where you could do things like style Polly's hair or decorate her room. They definitely kept 7-year-old me busy for hours upon hours. The doll's proportions shifted slowly over the years, but they saw their most drastic change in 2010. In an effort to revitalize the brand and once again boost crawling sales, Mattel brought in Generation 4. These dolls were far more stylized and given a more youthful appearance. The artwork and branding was updated to be more expressive, and the focus shifted from elaborate playsets to just pushing out fashion packs and as many clothing sets as possible. The cast is mostly retained from the previous generation, though without Anna, and Chrissy's ethnicity was changed to Latina to bring in a little more diversity to what has historically, unfortunately, been a pretty pale doll line. This generation also introduced the Cutants, which were just animals mixed with inanimate objects. Fan reaction to these were pretty much just asking why they needed to exist in the first place. I guess Mattel must have gotten the message because they disappeared shortly afterwards. There was a short-form animated webisode series in this generation, but it was arguably more juvenile than the previous animation. I always found it strange that Polly Pocket seemed to be aimed at a younger audience with each generation, despite small parts historically being quite detrimental for young kids. In any case, I wouldn't call Generation 4 a significant drop in quality, but it definitely lacked a lot of Generation 3's charm despite Mattel's attempts to keep the brand fresh and modern, so they actually didn't sell very well. In 2013, they actually did somewhat attempt to return to their roots with the Polyville series, which included 2-inch dolls and scaled-down playsets. But to say that these lacked the attention to detail the Bluebird compacts had would be an understatement. I also don't think these were very widely available in America, as by 2012, Mattel was only selling Polly Pockets in Europe and Brazil. Then, in 2015, the Polly Pocket brand was discontinued entirely due to its low sales and generally poor reception. For a while, it seemed like that was the end of Polly Pocket. The Generation 1 Bluebird compacts continued to be pretty highly sought after and occasionally very expensive items on the secondhand market, while the other generations were quietly filed away into our respective memories. However, in 2018, the beloved creator of Monster High, Garrett Sander, announced that Polly Pocket would actually be making a comeback. Not only that, but the compact-style toys would be making a return as well in an attempt to connect Polly with her roots while keeping the brand modern and also connected to Mattel's original vision. We officially enter the current Generation 5. The smaller playsets are definitely more indicative of the late 90s rebrand rather than the original Bluebird compacts, but with some interesting changes. Only Lila and Shawnee returned as characters, but both were given more distinct appearances and personalities. The miniature dolls are also now made of a softer, flexible plastic that sticks to the surface of the playset. The larger, fashion Polly-style dolls also make a return, but these are definitely more secondary to the smaller playsets. The new toys also come in a very wide variety, from small locket-sized compacts to much more elaborate building-shaped ones. To promote the toys, an animated series was also produced. In this, Polly is portrayed as a precocious and thrill-seeking child genius who can use a magical locket to shrink down to her trademark miniature size. Shawnee and Lila appear as main characters alongside a new male character named Nicholas. The reaction to the comeback, however, has mostly been lukewarm, and honestly, I'm not sure how to feel about it either. The toys are fine and seem to be pretty good quality, but the larger dolls don't really invoke nostalgia in me, despite the Fashion Polly playsets being very important to my childhood, and the larger ones just don't hold a candle to the Bluebird products. Like I said earlier, the Bluebird compacts were just phenomenal in the way they used space and filled every little corner with something to look at, and these just don't accomplish that. They're usually just not very detailed and honestly just not that interesting to look at, in my opinion. The ideas are there, and I do adore the character designs in this generation, but if I was going to collect Polly Pockets again, I would still find myself choosing to look for the Bluebird compacts or the original Fashion Pollys over anything in this generation. But what do you guys think? Do you think this is a good effort at returning Polly to a modern market? I'm honestly very curious about your thoughts because, like I said, I'm just not entirely sure what to think myself. Regardless though, it looks like Generation 5 of Polly Pocket is going strong and will likely continue for a while. If we get a Generation 6, I'm super curious what it'll look like. As always, thank you guys so much for watching. If you collect Polly Pockets or if you grew up playing with them like I did, let me know which generation was or still is your favorite. Also, what kind of changes would you like to see in the future, or do you think the current generation is perfect as is? I'm really curious what you guys think. Be sure to like and subscribe if you want to see more videos like this in the future. I have lots of fun stuff planned, so I'd love to have you there. Thank you.